That bag of fertilizer in your garage, the $40 one, the one you drag out every few weeks because the label swears you need it. Look at it for a second, because I'm about to make you angry you ever bought it. There is a powder sitting in most American kitchens right now that greens a lawn deeper, feeds it longer, and costs about $2. I called it a gimmick for years. I'm not selling it, nobody pays me. I just use it in my own backyard and watch the truth grow in. There's real university research behind this, a patent from the 1990s, and a hard number I'll give you before the end. And it works on the tired, patchy lawn you already have. Not just new sod. I remember the exact spot. The strip of grass by my mailbox in Ohio, the one that turned to straw every July no matter what I dumped on it. Last summer, I sprinkled this powder there on a Sunday morning, mostly to prove my neighbor wrong. 3 weeks later, that strip was the greenest thing on the street, and I stood there in my slippers feeling like a fool for every bag I'd ever hauled home. So, let me back up and tell you how I got here, because I was the biggest skeptic on the block. For almost 11 years, I paid a lawn service. Not a fancy one, just the truck that shows up every 6 weeks, sprays something, sticks a little flag in the yard, and leaves an invoice on my door. I was paying around $80 a visit. Do that math across a season, and I was handing over close to $500 a year to keep grass alive. Grass, the stuff that grows in ditches for free. And here's the part that ate at me. My lawn wasn't even that good. It was green for about a week after each visit, then it faded back to that pale, hungry color. The guy told me that was normal. He told me I needed more visits, more product, a premium package. Every problem had the same answer, and the answer always cost more. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not out to make you hate anybody. Most of those workers are just doing their job. But somebody, somewhere up the chain, figured out something a long time ago. They figured out that a lawn kept a little hungry is a lawn that keeps you paying. A quick green flush that fades fast is a better business model than a deep feed that lasts. Think about that. The fade is not a bug. For them, the fade is the product. I didn't understand that yet. I just knew I was tired and I was broke from it. The thing that finally cracked it open for me wasn't a YouTube video or a slick ad. It was an old man named Walt who lived 4 houses down. Walt was past 80, on a fixed income, never hired a service in his life, and his lawn embarrassed all of ours. Thick, dark, soft enough to nap on. I finally swallowed my pride one afternoon and asked him what he was spraying. He laughed at me. He said he didn't spray anything. He said he used something from his pantry, something his father used on a farm before the war, back when nobody could afford a bag of anything. He wouldn't tell me the name at first. He just smiled and said, "You wouldn't believe me." And that right there is why I'm making this whole video, because he was right. When he finally showed me, I didn't believe him. I want you to get there faster than I did. So what could it possibly be? Let me start narrowing it down, because the what matters less than the why, and the why is where this gets good. Here's the first clue. This powder is not a chemical anybody invented in a lab. It's a food. It's something people have eaten for thousands of years. Something that shows up in cornbread and animal feed and a dozen ordinary things. It was never designed to feed grass. That part was an accident, a discovery. And the man who discovered it wasn't a marketer. He was a university researcher who was actually studying something else entirely when the lawn benefit jumped out at him. That accident happened at a real place with a real name, and I'll get you there. But first, you have to understand what your grass is actually starving for. Because once you understand that, the powder makes perfect sense. Grass wants 3 things. And the biggest one, the one every fertilizer bag brags about, is nitrogen. Nitrogen is what makes a lawn green and makes it grow. When your yard looks pale and slow, 9 times out of 10, it's hungry for nitrogen. Now, here's what the bag doesn't explain to you. There are 2 ways to deliver nitrogen. There's the fast way and the slow way. The fast way is a salt. It dissolves the second it gets wet, dumps a flood of nitrogen into the soil all at once, and the grass gulps it down in a giant green rush. That's the flush I told you about. It looks incredible for about 10 days. Then it's gone, washed past the roots, and down into the groundwater, and your lawn is hungry again. Fast nitrogen is a sugar high. It feels like feeding. It's really just spiking and crashing your yard over and over. The slow way is completely different. The slow way locks the nitrogen inside something the soil has to break down first. Little living things in the dirt, the microbes, have to eat it and release the nitrogen a crumb at a time over weeks. No flood, no crash. Just a steady, patient trickle of food that keeps the color even from spring straight through the hot part of summer. And this $2 powder, It is one of the slowest, steadiest, gentlest nitrogen sources you can put on a lawn. That's the paradox that got me. The cheapest thing in the aisle behaves better than the expensive stuff, because the expensive stuff is engineered to impress you fast and leave fast. But slow feeding was only the first surprise. The second one is the reason a university bothered to study it at all, and it's the reason I stopped calling my lawn service for good. Because this powder doesn't just feed your grass. While it's feeding the grass, it's quietly doing something to the weeds. Something the researcher never expected. Something that, once it got out, made a lot of people in the herbicide business very uncomfortable. Let me tell you about the discovery because this is the anchor I promised, and it's real. You can look it up. At Iowa State University, a turfgrass scientist named Dr. Nick Christians was running experiments back in the 1980s. He wasn't even trying to invent a weed killer. He was working with this ordinary corn-based powder for a completely different reason, and he noticed something strange in his test plots. Wherever he applied it, the grass grew thick and green, sure, but the new weed seeds wouldn't sprout. The crabgrass just didn't come up. He tested it again, same result. He kept testing, and by 1991, the university had filed a patent on it as a natural weed preventer. Read that again. A food powder applied to a lawn that feeds the grass while stopping weed seeds from taking root. That is two expensive products, the fertilizer and the pre-emergent weed control, replaced by one thing that costs about $2 a pound in bulk and even less if you know where to look. I found that research on a night I couldn't sleep, still fuming about a lawn bill, and I sat there reading a university extension page thinking, why has nobody ever told me this? Why did I have to find a decades-old patent from an agriculture school in Iowa to learn something this useful? I think you already know why. Nobody makes a fortune selling you a $2 bag of something you can practically get at the grocery store. There's no premium package in it, there's no truck that has to come back every 6 weeks. A product that lasts all summer and fixes the weeds too is a product that ends the relationship. And an industry built on the relationship has no reason to hand you that. But knowing the research existed wasn't enough for me. I've been burned by internet miracle fixes before. I needed to watch it happen in my own dirt. So the next spring, I ran my own little trial. And I want to walk you through exactly what I saw, because this is where I stopped doubting. I split my front yard down the middle. On the left side, I did what I'd always done, the store fertilizer, the fast green stuff. On the right side, I used nothing but this powder, spread by hand out of a coffee can, about 20 pounds across that half of the yard. Then I wrote the date on my garage calendar and I waited. The first week, honestly, the left side looked better. The chemical side jumped up green and proud while my powder side just sat there looking ordinary. I'll be straight with you, I almost quit. I stood there thinking Walt had sold me a story. The slow side tests your patience. And if you give up in week 1, you'll never see what comes next. By week 3, everything flipped. The fast side had already started to pale, that hungry look creeping back in right on schedule. But the powder side had turned a deep, saturated green and it stayed that way. Week 4, the same. Week 6, still holding, while the chemical half was screaming for another feeding. By the middle of the summer, there was a visible line down my yard, and the cheap side was winning so clearly that 2 different neighbors asked what I'd done to the right half. And the weeds. Along the edge of my driveway where crabgrass invades every single July, the powder side stayed clean. Not perfect, I won't lie to you and say it's magic, but noticeably clean compared to the mess I usually fight. That old patent from Iowa was playing out right there on my own concrete. And if you want all of this laid out in one place, the research, the exact amounts, the timing by season, and the mistakes I made so you don't have to, I put everything into a book called The Lawn Fix. It's the complete playbook I wish I'd had before. I spent years handing money to a truck that kept my yard just hungry enough to need it. You can find the link in the description, and it costs less than a single bag of the fast stuff. Nobody makes a fortune selling you the cheap way, and that's exactly why I wrote it down. Now, back to where we were, because knowing the research existed wasn't enough for me. Now here's the objection I can already hear you making, because I made it too. You're thinking, that's fine for his yard, but my lawn is already a disaster. Thin, patchy, half weeds. You're thinking this powder is for people starting fresh with new seed or new sod, and your beat up old lawn is too far gone for a pantry trick to fix. I need you to hear this next part, because this part is for you specifically. The tired, established lawn you're standing on right now, the one you're about ready to tear up, this is exactly the lawn this method was made for, and here's how I'd rescue it without a single piece of professional equipment. You don't till anything, you don't strip the yard, you don't rent a machine, You take this powder and you spread it right over the grass you already have, weeds and thin spots and all. On an established lawn, the ideal timing is early spring, right about when you see the forsythia bushes bloom yellow, because that's the same window the crabgrass seeds are getting ready to wake up. You want the powder down before those seeds sprout, so the feeding and the weed prevention line up together. For an existing lawn, I use about 20 pounds for every 1,000 square feet. You just broadcast it by hand or with a cheap spreader, even in light, then you water it in. That watering step matters. A good soak activates it and gets those soil microbes working on releasing the nitrogen. Then, and this is the hard part for impatient people like me, you let it be. You do not need to reapply every couple weeks like the fast stuff demands. One good application carries an existing lawn a long way into the season, and you can do a second lighter round in early fall if your yard was really beaten down. The thin patches fill in because the grass finally has steady food instead of a spike and crash. The roots go deeper, and deeper roots are what let an old lawn survive the hot months when everybody else's yard is going brown and crunchy. I watched my mailbox strip, the one I told you about, the one that died every July for a decade, hold its color through the worst heat we had. Same soil, same grass. The only thing that changed was I stopped starving it with quick fixes and started feeding it slow. One honest warning, neighbor to neighbor, because I won't tell you, it's foolproof. This powder prevents new seeds from sprouting. That's the whole weed fighting trick. So if you're planning to plant new grass seed in a bare spot, don't put the powder there at the same time, or your good seed won't come up either. Seed those bare patches first, let the new grass get established, and save the powder for the areas you're only feeding. Once you understand that one rule, you can't really mess this up. So now you're feeding an old lawn for pennies and knocking back the weeds at the same time. But there's a deeper layer here, and it's the part that finally made me cancel the service for good, because it explains why the expensive way was never going to work no matter how much I spent. Everything I'd been buying was aimed at the grass blades. Green it up, top down, but a lawn doesn't live in the blades. A lawn lives in the soil, in that thin, dark layer of life underneath. All those microbes and fungi and tiny workers breaking things down and feeding the roots. Fast chemical salts don't feed that layer. Some of them actually beat it up over time, leaving the soil a little more dead and a little more dependent on you every single year. That's why the lawn never got easier. Every season started from scratch because the ground underneath was never getting stronger. This powder does the opposite. It's food for that underground world first, and the grass second. You're not just feeding your lawn, you're building the soil that grows the lawn so next year starts better than this year did. That's the thing no 6-week service will ever sell you. Because a customer whose soil gets richer every year is a customer who needs them less every year. And needing them less is the one outcome the whole model is built to prevent. I want to give you the numbers plainly, because numbers cut through all the marketing. I was paying roughly $500 a year for the service. On top of that, I'd buy a couple bags of fertilizer myself, call it another $60 or $70, plus a jug of weed killer, another $20. Round it off, and I was spending close to $600 a year on my yard and still not happy with it. My powder program now, I buy it in a 50-pound bag. Depending on where you get it, that's somewhere between $15 and $30 for the bag, and that bag covers my whole yard with plenty left over. Break it down by the pound, and you really are talking about a couple dollars for the amount most small lawns need in a feeding. I went from $600 a year to under $30, and my lawn looks better than it ever did on the expensive plan. That's not a small saving, that's a car payment. That's a nice dinner out every month for doing less work. Less work is the other thing nobody mentions. The fast stuff is a treadmill. Feed, fade, feed, fade, all summer long, and the more you feed, the faster it grows, which means the more you have to mow. I was mowing myself into a second job. The slow powder gives you even, moderate growth instead of those explosive spurts. So I'm mowing less, feeding less, and standing around admiring my yard more. That's supposed to be the whole point, isn't it? All right, I've made you wait long enough, and you've earned it. Because if you stuck with me this far, you're exactly the kind of homeowner this is for. Let me tell you what this powder actually is. It's corn gluten meal. That's it, corn gluten meal. A soft yellowish powder that's nothing more than a byproduct of milling corn, the same corn that's in your cornbread and your tortilla chips, and the feed on every farm in the Midwest. For 100 years, it was mostly known as cheap animal feed, something farmers bought by the ton without thinking twice. It was hiding in plain sight the entire time. It runs around 9 to 10% nitrogen by weight, which is real, usable feeding power. And because that nitrogen is bound up in protein, it releases slow and steady exactly the way I described. That's your all-summer green, right there in a feed store bag. And the weed magic? That was Dr. Nick Christians at Iowa State University, the man I told you about. He and his team were the ones who discovered, back in the 1980s, that corn gluten meal stops seeds from developing roots when they first sprout. The university patented it as a natural pre-emergent weed control in 1991. This isn't folklore, it isn't some guy on the internet guessing. It's a documented discovery from a major agricultural research university, sitting in the public record, that somehow never made it onto the front of a single bag in the big box store. Old Walt knew it because his father knew it, from a time when farm families fed their lawns and gardens with whatever the mill left over, because they couldn't afford anything else. That knowledge got old-fashioned. It got buried under shiny bags and truck subscriptions and premium packages, but it never stopped being true. The people who couldn't afford the expensive way kept the cheap way alive, and it turns out the cheap way was better all along. Here's exactly how you use it. Simple enough to do this weekend. Get corn gluten meal from a feed store, a farm supply, or order it online, the plain kind, nothing added. For an existing lawn, spread about 20 pounds for every 1,000 square feet, early spring when the forsythia blooms for the best weed prevention, then water it in well. Let it work. Come back with a lighter second round in early fall if your lawn needs it. Keep it away from spots where you're trying to grow new seed, because it'll stop your good seed too. That's the whole thing. That's what I replace $600 a year with. So here's what I really want you to walk away with. This was never about a powder. It's about the quiet feeling you get when you realize something simple was kept just out of reach, sold back to you in a fancier bag, and you finally take it back. That patch of green by my mailbox isn't just grass anymore. It's proof I stopped being an easy customer. And that's who you are too, if you made it this far. You're not the guy who keeps writing the check just because the truck showed up. You're the guy who'd rather know the truth, spend $2, and do it himself. That's not being cheap, that's being awake. So let me ask you something, and I actually want your answer. What's the yearly number for you? Add up the service, the bags, the jugs of weed killer, all of it, and tell me what your lawn has really been costing you every year. Put that number in the comments. I read them, and I promise you it's going to shock some people to see it written out. And if you've got a Walt in your neighborhood, an old-timer with a suspiciously perfect yard and a pantry secret, tell me about him too. If you're tired of paying premium prices to keep your own grass barely alive, subscribe and stick around, because this channel is just homeowners looking out for each other. No sponsors and no products to push. Next time, I'm going to show you the $2 pantry item I use to bring a dead, compacted brown patch back to life without digging up a single inch of soil. And it's not the powder we talked about today. Wait until you see what that one does to hard dirt. I couldn't believe it either. Before you go, one thing. Inside the Honest Lawn Circle, I continue this video with the full pantry powder method so you get it right. And you can ask me your own lawn question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime with one click. No risk. Now that you're saving money on feeding your lawn, let me show you something just as important. You might be watering all wrong, and it's slowly hurting your grass. That next video is starting right here.